Actions speak louder than words. So when these media companies say, do as I say, not as I do, ignore them. Digital media is collapsing, ladies and gentlemen, and there's good reason. No one trusts the press anymore. They're operating off of borrowed time venture capital, and now key players in the expansion of digital news are jumping ship, raising questions about whether or not digital media can actually survive. You can ask me? I say the answer is no. I think media as a whole is on the verge of collapse, and I think this is proof. Top editors leave Huffington Post and BuzzFeed News amid growing doubts about the future of digital news. Now, Ben Smith was the editor-in-chief of BuzzFeed News. I think he's a good dude. I think they got issues. He's not perfect. Nobody is. They've done some things I'm very, very critical of. But he jumped ship to become a New York Times columnist, of all things. To me, that's kind of weird, but I guess when you have the opportunity, take it, right? Especially when you know something you're not telling us. Digital media is not viable, and it's likely going to collapse, as we've seen many other companies collapse. Strip down a skeleton crews, it just doesn't survive. They tried to play the woke game, didn't work. Well, let's read the story from the Washington Post. They say, in the span of just a few weeks, the top editors of two leading digital news outfits called it quits. Ben Smith, who ran BuzzFeed News for 8 years, took a job writing a column at the New York Times. Lydia Polgreen is leaving Huffington Post to oversee a podcast company. And I'm going to have to say, smart moves. Podcasting is through the roof. Lots of money to be made in a podcast, and everyone and their grandma apparently now has a podcast. The other thing, going to New York Times, guaranteed job. Hey, columnist for the Gray Lady, the paper of record, not a bad jump. Only if the company is not going to survive, though. I mean, you're running BuzzFeed News. I can't imagine being a columnist pays more, does it? Unless he's bowing out? I don't know. Two does not make a trend, but it does raise a question. Do their departures, smack in the middle of the busiest news cycle in years, say something about the troubled state of the digital news media? Both editors answer a firm no. They say their decisions were personal, not an extension of some larger industry malaise. Nevertheless, it's impossible not to notice the context. HuffPost and BuzzFeed were once the shooting stars of the new media galaxy, innovators that showed legacy media organizations how news could be edited and packaged for the young and digitally savvy. The former pioneered high-volume commentary, almost entirely liberal, and eventually coupled it with some first-class reporting, becoming one of the first digital-only news organizations to win a Pulitzer Prize. The latter began as a purveyor of listicles, quizzes, and other clickbaity content, but under Smith developed into a newsroom that broke several important stories, but also famously flopped in its reporting about special counsel Robert S. Mueller III's investigation of President Trump. I will let you in on a secret. It's not actually a secret, it's the truth. News has always been a lost leader. The reason people have news divisions in the first place was to make catchy headlines, to tell you things that were important. It was a marketing tool, and it was considered a public good, and they lost money on it. They made money on ads and other products that they sold in their paper space, typically. Well, now Google and Facebook dominate the ads market. So doing news doesn't really make sense. This has resulted in literally BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, listicles and commentary and other garbage. Well, now these companies aren't even viable themselves because when they first started, they were a hybrid of these two different spaces. You had a news organization, but also clickbait. That was it for a long time. Today, social media is where clickbait is born and where it lives on. People can come watch my YouTube videos. I pay myself. My flagship channels, Timcast and Timcast News, just me. For the most part, I do have help. The Timcast IRL show has actually a bunch of employees help make that work. But for the most part, when it comes to what makes money and what functions, a newsroom is not it. And BuzzFeed's Ben Smith and Lydia Polgreen probably saw this. We're entering an era where content is free to produce. Not everybody is smart enough to produce it or to produce good content. But the fact is, you don't need them anymore, and we know it. Let me show you something funny. 35 times the media said Wuhan or Chinese coronavirus, but they blame the GOP. I mean, this is CNN. Media is complete trash at this point. They just say whatever they need to say to get those views, and people know it. Now people are being given a choice. Why go to BuzzFeed when they're going to give you the same regurgitated garbage? Why go to Huffington Post when they're going to give you the same regurgitated garbage? Here's the reality. I talked to a bunch of these digital media companies a long time ago, and I said, tell me how you compete with a grandma filming her cat and putting that video on Facebook. That costs nothing. And it gives Facebook all of the content for free. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are the latest iterations of radio and and newspapers. A newsroom like BuzzFeed needs to hire people at a decent salary to live in New York to produce content. But they're not going to make that much because what do they really sell? Ad space? Facebook and Google dominate ad space, and we all produce content for free. That's right. I compete with millions of people who just take their phone and talk to themselves and upload it. I actually kind of love it. You know why? The news media space has become a meritocracy. Those who work the hardest or make the most entertaining commentary or, let's be real, give out that confirmation bias are more likely to succeed. But it's better, in my opinion, than these companies that are gatekeepers. You might have a really important and good opinion, something that people should hear, and they say, no, thank you. We hold the keys. Today, all you got to do is start working, and people have a choice. Now, there are a lot of problems. Google and Facebook have monopolistic powers. It's dangerous. And a lot of people aren't producing news anymore. But hey, that's the way it's been changing with or without Google. Let's read a little bit more. They say these days, the sky no longer seems the limit, not just for BuzzFeed and Huffington Post, but for the entire field of digital news sites that had once seemed to be journalism's future. Digital publishers face the same issues that have beset and decimated whole swaths of the traditional media, particularly local papers. Digital ad rates have fallen steadily for years amid an unending supply of competitors and slow growing demand from sponsors. Looming over the entire business are the twin colossi, Facebook and Google, like I said, which collect about 60% of every dollar spent by digital advertisers. Video streaming, once thought to be a savior, turned out to be a high-cost investment with mixed returns. And few digital publishers have been able to convert their visitors into regular subscribers, which seem to be a key to long-term financial stability. Yet, here on YouTube, if you are an individual and you build trust and you have fans, people come back. I want you to think back to the last Huffington Post article you read or BuzzFeed article you read. Maybe you're saying, I don't read BuzzFeed or Huffington Post. Hey, that's another response. To those of you who have, can you remember who actually wrote the article? You can't, can you? Which brings me to a funny point about digital media. No editorial mission, just wanton chasing of clickbait trash. So you'll find articles from Vice, for instance, that say something like San Francisco is, a hellhole. And then you'll find another one that says San Francisco is a paradise. I'm not kidding. They actually do this. There's no editorial mission. You don't know who's writing. And you might follow them on Twitter. But when you see a story, it's a Vice story, not a John Smith story or a Jane Smith story. However, on YouTube, you like listening to Steven Crowder. You like listening to David Pakman. Maybe you said, I don't like listening to that guy, I like that guy. Or you like listening to Tim Pool. We on YouTube are able to actually develop followings and have people come and want to listen and watch content. News media can't do that because they have no cohesive voice. They're big organizations that just do whatever. And they're falling down because of it. Now, I think there's some challenges we're facing. A lack of news. Admittedly, when it comes to YouTube, people aren't sourcing the news. You might like Pakman, Crowder, or me, but for the most part, we just provide commentary on existing news. Now, to give myself some credit, I actually help fund and oversee an actual news channel over at Subverse, but they're entirely independent. And the reason I do that is for exactly this reason. I know that people are more interested in confirmation bias and commentary. They're more likely to watch me talk about stuff than they are to go to BuzzFeed. And that's the mistake these brands made. They didn't have a voice. They were just random clickbait trash. Now, Huffington Post is just a bunch of leftists complaining about Trump and stuff like that. Fine. But if you watch me, I make sure to give back and make sure news is being produced to the best of my abilities. But for the most part, Subverse does its thing. They're editorially independent from me on purpose. I want to make sure that news doesn't just end here because these companies couldn't figure it out. But this says something about these companies. They produce news, biased news, because they need to make money to sustain that biased news. It taints the whole product. And that's why I think these companies are on the verge of collapse. No one is going to trust them anymore. They put out the same garbage narratives, they make up fake news, and they say, but you should trust us because we're better. And then they fall apart, and their key staff leave. And what's left? Skeleton crews? They can't make the money if all they do is chase the narrative. Now, when it comes to an individual, I have my opinions. I have my bias. If you come to me, you're looking at a relatively moderate individual who has pretty much a lot of disdain for Democrats over their failures in the past several years. But for the most part, you're getting an individual's opinion that you like getting, be it me, Jimmy Dore, Steven Crowder, Kyle Kalinske, David Pakman, etc. These are people that you say, I'm going to listen to, I'm going to get their opinions. Let the media go. Let them end. Let them die. They couldn't figure it out. They can't make it work. But I do think we need to be careful because we do need legit journalism. Anyway, the reason I want to do this segment was because of the coronavirus thing. These cable networks and these media companies are now, like Samantha Bee, saying it's racist to tie the virus to China when they were the ones who actually did it. People don't trust these big blind organizations that have no voice. And if you look at someone like Samantha Bee, I think she's even on the way out too, because she's totally fake. Her opinions make literally no sense. So people are going to turn to Joe Rogan, right? Anyway, these are interesting examples, but let's read his final conclusion. He says, well, he doesn't really have a conclusion, but I'm not going to read. This is ridiculous. Even the Washington Post is trash, whatever. It's evidence, in my opinion, these organizations are falling apart, which is good news to an extent. I'll leave it there, whatever. I wanted to highlight this. I don't know if I was direct enough or whatever. I'll see you all in the next segment.